Hello and welcome to the lecture series on sustainability marketing, lecture 2 on framing sustainability marketing. Now in the last 2 episodes you've heard Professor Ken Peaty talk about framing sustainability marketing, and I would like to welcome him to the interview. Thank you for joining me. And as you were talking in the last 2 episodes, you brought up a concept on micro-marketing objectives and macro-marketing objectives. I was wondering that when marketers are determining the micro-marketing objectives, is there ever a chance where they clash or conflict with the macro-marketing objectives, and how do they deal with this kind of conflict?
I think in terms of sustainability marketing at a micro-marketing level, I think because sustainability marketers are trying to pursue more socially equitable or environmentally sustainable solutions, then usually there isn't a clash in terms of creating some problems at a more societal level that become a macro-marketing problem. I think there are 1 or 2 examples though where really very well-intentioned ideas at a micro-marketing level of developing particular products, for example, have caused problems at a more of a macro-marketing level. One example might be looking at the development of electric vehicles, and particularly if those can be powered by renewable electricity, and they're seen as being a much less polluting form of personal transport, so a good product that people have tried to promote. One point about electric vehicles though is they're not just energy and fuel efficient, they're also pretty quiet. They make very little noise, and at first people thought, well, this is great, this is reducing noise pollution. But what they realised was that when they're on the road, you can't typically hear an electric vehicle coming. So in terms of health and safety of pedestrians, of cyclists, it actually posed a significant problem. So what you've seen recently is electric car manufacturers experimenting with new technologies, like having a little speaker mounted on the front of the car, just putting a little kind of almost a beam of sound out in front, creating a car engine-like noise to try and make them more noticeable for pedestrians and cyclists, and therefore safer. So you can actually get some problems like that have to be addressed. Also, some people think that what appear to be solutions can create new problems. I saw a very interesting article written about eBay. Now eBay, a lot of people think, and I personally really like eBay, as a way of reusing old products, so that if you've got a product that you've finished with, you can sell it through eBay, somebody else gets the value from it, the resources aren't wasted, and that seems like a very good sort of socially responsible and sustainable way of handling your old goods. I saw an interesting argument saying one of the problems with eBay is it makes getting rid of your old stuff so easy that it actually encourages people to consume more. That sometimes it's like having a lot of stuff in your house maybe makes you think, okay, well, I've got enough stuff, so maybe I'll stop buying so much. And that if eBay is producing this very easy channel to get rid of your old stuff, it actually does stimulate consumption rather than just simply helping to recycle resources. So it's interesting that that's something I'd never thought of. So you can get some of these more macro marketing issues cropping up in sustainability marketing. Another one, I guess, is on things like pricing, that one of the arguments in sustainability marketing is that very often the products that we consume are artificially cheap, because the social, the environmental costs aren't reflected in the prices that we pay. So effectively, the environment, future generations as well, as sort of subsidizing our consumption. And sometimes to try and reduce resource use, we change the way things are priced. And a typical example might be changing how we price water. So rather than water being free or paid for just in terms of some kind of annual fee, you might move to have water meters in houses so that you pay for as much as you use. Well, again, that's caused concern in some countries about water poverty, about poorer consumers not being able to afford basics like water, really because of quite well-intentioned efforts to try and reduce consumption. So I think social marketers do have to be, sustainability marketers, I should say, do need to be sensitive to the potential social implications of what they do. And there is always the question that very often sustainable marketing solutions currently exist in kind of market niches, reaching a relatively small proportion of the market. You have to say, well, what would happen if that was scaled up? What would happen if it did if those technologies were to be provided to the mass of the market, would that create more problems? And some people argued that some of the technologies being proposed as sustainable technologies, if you did have everybody purchasing them, that would create new resource problems linked to maybe particular, like rare earth minerals and other components needed for things like solar panels, for example. So it is definitely something that sustainability marketers need to think about, although most of the time I think the micro and the macro do work pretty much in harmony within sustainability marketing.
And would you say that to those who actually implement sustainability marketing, that they've actually managed to sustain this balance between the two?
I think so, although I think often most companies don't necessarily think at the big picture level, I think, very often. I think sometimes, and that's why I think macro marketing has evolved as a separate field, is because quite often within the conventional marketing academy, people were very concerned about things at the individual company level or maybe the individual market level and didn't tend to step back and think about things from a societal level. It can be quite tough, I think, for a company to do that of itself, just to understand not just its market and its product, but also to understand how that fits into all of society. I think it's great when companies can do that, but sometimes it's quite hard for practical marketers to think in quite that bigger picture way.
Yeah. Are there these two concepts that you keep referring to? It's social marketing and societal marketing. So I was wondering if you could perhaps reiterate the difference between the two.
Yes, and they're easily confused because of the names, and even some very expert marketing commentators I notice occasionally do get them confused. Societal marketing, I tend to think about it in terms of socially responsible marketing. So it's commercial marketing, and it's thinking about the impact that commercial marketing has on society. Societal marketing really arose because I think it was really a way of challenging the notion that was handed down to marketing, I think, from neoclassical economics, that basically long-run consumer good or consumer welfare and long-run societal welfare really comes from letting consumers just consume what they want to buy, and so that it's like the collective benefits from everybody consuming the things they want is really maximised by just allowing people really to consume and choose pretty much as they like. And it was this idea that we maybe need to think not just about immediate customer satisfaction, but think more about long-term customer welfare, because one of the problems is there are products we like and products that we consume that maybe don't do as good in the long term. So, high-fat food, for example, you could say alcohol, you could say high-fashion shoes, for example, if you happen to wear them, maybe don't do you that much good in the long run. Perhaps the most extreme example is cigarettes. Cigarettes are a very interesting and unique product in many ways. They're the only product on the planet which, if you use it as intended, will kill you if something else doesn't get you first. The medical evidence shows us that, So it's an unusual product. It's a product that, if we let people consume it, it will kill them. And you think, well, is that okay? That's an interesting question. And I think, we're starting to get a bit of a debate about, well, really, who should decide what's good for consumers? Is it okay just for consumers to decide what's good for them? And the libertarians would tell us, well, it's nobody else's business but the consumers what they consume. But then again, what happens if other people get hurt? If you look at alcohol consumption, for example, very often it's not just the people who consume the alcohol that gets hurt. It's people around them, if you have antisocial behaviour. It's people on the road or pedestrians, if we're talking about drink driving. It can lead to the destruction of families. So, it's a product that comes, at a pretty high social price for an immediate, dose of customer satisfaction. Now, I won't necessarily say alcohol's bad. I quite like alcohol, and there's good evidence to show that consumed in moderation, it actually does help with issues like heart disease, for example. But it poses some really interesting questions about, well, if other people have to pick up the bill for our consumption, and if other people get hurt by our consumption, is it okay just to say, well, our consumption's just our own business? And similarly, really, I think with things like alcohol consumption, for example, is saying, well, is it a company's responsibility? If a consumer consumes irresponsibly, does the company have a responsibility for that? Or is it just purely the customer's fault? So, it poses some very, very almost interesting philosophical questions about society and the nature of society, about the responsibilities we have as citizens and as consumers and as companies, and whether individual freedom should trump all sorts of other considerations like consumer welfare, and like societal welfare. And I won't say I've necessarily got a simple answer to something like that. But so societal marketing really is an approach to marketing where you try and tackle some of those broad social consequences of the products and services that are being marketed and how they're consumed, and really trying to make marketing as a commercial operation socially responsible. Now, social marketing, by contrast, is mostly practiced by people who are not commercial marketers. It mostly happens in public sector organisations. And 99% of campaigns that have been run in social marketing up till now have tended to be health campaigns. So it's, can we use marketing to stop people smoking? Can we use marketing to stop people drinking too much? Can we use marketing to help people take more exercise, eat less high-fat food, etc.? And it's really a different approach to the way governments have tended to do things in the past, which is just to tell people, say, don't drink, and don't eat too much, and take exercise. It was very much this kind of, we'll send these kind of big messages to people to tell them what they should do. And of course, people don't really like being told what to do. So social marketing uses the toolbox of the commercial marketer and says, well, let's research people. Let's understand why they eat too much. Let's understand why they don't exercise. Let's understand why they drink too much, and so on. And if we can understand why they engage in a behaviour, we can maybe use a marketing type solution to try and persuade them to change their behaviour, to exercise more, to drink less. And maybe people don't take exercises for all sorts of reasons, because it's too expensive, or they don't have access to places to exercise, or maybe they don't really understand the benefits, or perhaps it doesn't really fit in with their lifestyle. And perhaps government agencies can find ways of offering solutions, much as a sustainability marketing manager in a commercial setting will find ways of delivering solutions to help the customer change their behaviour, to become healthier. And increasingly, we're starting to look at social marketing campaigns in terms of more sustainable lifestyles. So encouraging people to use their cars less and to walk or use bikes more, eat more healthily and perhaps less, and eat more sustainably, run their homes in a more energy efficient way, and so on. And what's interesting about recent trends is we're seeing social marketers and commercial marketers worried about sustainable behaviours really starting to come together, because a company who are looking to promote energy efficiency in the home might be interested in, for example, promoting people using their washing machines at lower temperatures, using new detergents that only require you to wash at something like 30 degrees or less. Well, for a government agency trying to promote energy efficiency for a climate change agenda, that very much fits in with them. So we're starting to see a lot of joint campaigns coming together now where social marketers in the public sector, commercial marketers with a sustainability agenda, starting to really both come together to try and produce the idea of sustainable lifestyles and sustainable living.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you point that out. I don't know if this would apply, but I've noticed that even on cigarette packs, they're selling you the cigarettes, but you actually have something that tells you that this is not good for your health and, the potential damages it could do to you. So would you say this is actually an element of perhaps joint marketing, of both social marketing and actual commercial marketing?
Certainly, I think that putting the information on packets to try and influence consumer behaviour is something that both governments can try and regulate, and commercial marketers can try and do voluntarily. I think with the cigarettes is an example where it's actually been a bit of a battle between the companies on the one hand trying to resist any change and trying to very much promote this freedom of personal consumption agenda, and governments worried about the social and health cost of smoking, trying to push ways of reducing the desirability of smoking. I mean, it's interesting, certainly within the UK lately, the battle has been about plain packaging on cigarettes, because they've tried to push through an agenda that you've got to take away the marketing trappings, if you like, of cigarettes, not have the branding, not have the glossy packets, just plain packets for cigarettes to make them really a more boring product, a bit less glamorous. And it's interesting how much the cigarette companies hate that and are really lobbying very hard to try and stop that kind of measure going through.
Yeah, well, still on this concept of maybe the society, sustainability marketing, getting back to that, do you think it would depend on the target market? Like, say, for example, well, I'm from Zimbabwe, and I'm currently living in Germany. Would I expect the same approach to go for both countries, or marketers have a way to deal with this? And if so, how exactly do they handle it?
Yeah, I think for marketers of any type, really, whether you're a conventional commercial marketer or somebody interested in sustainability marketing, I think being sensitive to differences across countries, across culture, different cultures is very much part of the job. I think maybe with sustainability marketing there's an added layer of complexity, because you've maybe got differences not just in sort of lifestyles and economies and cultures within countries. You've also got different sustainability priorities, so different social challenges, different environmental challenges. I think what I would say that's quite interesting, though, is there's probably more similarities across countries than people realise to begin with. I remember it was in the 1990s was when the first really big comparative international studies of consumer concern about environmental interest was published. And I remember at the time people were almost quite shocked that a consumer in South Korea actually worried about much the same sustainability issues as a consumer in America, or a consumer in Brazil, or a consumer in France. That the similarities were more striking than the differences, and I think that was a lesson that really came out of those early consumer surveys. I think there are differences, though, that marketers need to be aware of, and sometimes quite similar looking countries can have differences in the issues that worry them. So, you might think of Britain and Germany, for example, as really quite similar countries in many ways, and yet the British consumer, we know from the research data, is more concerned about, say, issues of animal cruelty or water pollution. They tend to be particularly worried about those, whereas the German consumer typically is very much more concerned about the health of their forests and those sort of natural environmental resources in that sense. So there are subtle differences between countries. I think on the bigger picture, you can see different types of trends emerging in different regions of the world, and different approaches to really sustainable development as a political goal. And I think that then has implications for the types of sustainability marketing which maybe will be adopted in different countries. And the Sustainability in a Multipolar World report that I mentioned in Lecture 1 did sort of talk about, in Lecture 2, I should say, did talk about some of those differences between particular regions. And I think some of those are quite striking. I think if we're talking about Africa as a continent, including countries like Zimbabwe, I think what we've seen so far from them is they're often involved in sustainability marketing solutions, often at the supply end. So I think what we've seen is, for example, fair trade, supply chains that are fed from Africa, with maybe the goods and services being sold elsewhere. In ecotourism, for example, there are a lot of very well-established ecotourism ventures in Africa, some owned locally, but some owned by sort of more international companies, where maybe the profit unfortunately gets expatriated afterwards. I think there are a variety of sustainability-orientated brands that have emerged within Africa, but they tend to be quite local. They tend to be there's some sort of clothing ones, food ones, ecotourism ones. And I know when the last Interbrand Global Sustainability Brand Survey was published, there was quite a lot of debate in Africa, particularly in South Africa. I know from Stellenbosch University, really talking about, it's almost, where are the African sustainability brands, and almost is the next stage of development of the sustainability marketing agenda going to be less about the very established global brands from America, Europe, Japan, and we'll start seeing brands from Africa, from Latin America, from Asia, maybe based on some of these quite innovative sustainability companies that are emerging there, starting to take their solutions more globally.
Yeah, and you can even say that in Africa, or at least where I come from, sustainability is being implemented in everyday life in terms of the food we eat. We heavily consume organic food, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you get it straight from the ground, so definitely you can see that they do implement sustainability. But I was wondering that since there can be slight differences, are multinational companies willing to deal with these kind of complexities just in order to perhaps practice sustainability marketing? Is this something they are willing to go through and to face?
Yeah, I think multinational companies, in some ways, they're used to dealing with different cultures and countries. So in terms of having an international and agenda and one that's sensitive to local differences is something they're quite used to. I mean, people talk about this globalization agenda, which is a terrible word, but the idea that these global companies are starting to understand really how to make themselves like local operations in particular countries. I think that may ultimately be taken further with the sustainability agenda, because one of the things we know about the global economy is we often have very global consumption and production systems in terms of products being made, on one side of the world and shipped to another side of the world in order to be sold and marketed. And the embedded energy, the embedded carbon emissions in those kind of global distribution systems are really very significant and ultimately potentially unsustainable. So I think if we talk about the long-term future and a more sustainable future, we're probably going to see a move towards more localized productions of consumption and production, possibly with a sort of network of sort of high-tech micro-factories producing particular goods rather than one global factory in one country servicing the whole world market. So I think what we might see is multinational corporations moving towards more of a network almost of localized operations, not just in terms of marketing operations, but production and consumption and marketing operations in those different countries. So I think that maybe is the long-term future. I think in the present, one of the things for multinationals, I think often is to be consistent across its different markets. And I think you've had companies running into problems, really developing good social and environmental strategies for particular countries, maybe countries where there's a lot of customers or there are investors or where the headquarters happens to be. But then when you follow back down the supply chain into some of the countries it operates in for production purposes, for resource extraction purposes, maybe the performance is not quite so good. And I think increasingly the media and I think activists are becoming pretty sophisticated at looking at where these companies are being inconsistent in the way they manage their social and environmental impacts. So I think increasingly multinationals have to be pretty vigilant about that. But I think we're seeing examples of companies really starting to develop sustainability strategies that do reflect the issues of the country, the different countries they operate in. So again, just to use, I've used it a few times, but the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, I like again because they're very much identifying what particular needs there are in particular countries. That in India, for example, with hygiene being a major challenge for maintaining health, that it's really helping customers to use hygiene products in ways that protect their health, or maybe in countries like India, but also other countries like parts of America or Australia, finding low water solutions to meeting their needs. Whereas in other countries, perhaps quite a different agenda for the sustainability strategy of the company in that country. So I think we're starting to see those quite sort of sophisticated strategies being developed by multinational corporations. The one thing I would say also is, there is an ethical agenda, I think, that these big companies have to start to maybe address more thoroughly, is in terms of, in a sense, where does the money go within their business operations? There have been recent outcries over things like transfer pricing, for example, where multinational companies effectively manipulate the internal prices that parts of the business charge one another in order to show profits in countries where they will pay less tax. And you have to think, well, often this is legal, but how socially responsible and ethical is it? Or if we think about a market like tourism, you have big tourism operators developing sort of tourist resources in particular countries, perhaps in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. And yes, that does put some wealth into the local economy and create jobs, but the profit tends to end up back in the home country. It doesn't necessarily help to produce sort of wealth and investment within the local communities. So I think, for some of these big companies, I think they're going to have to start asking some questions really about, well, is it okay in terms of the money ending up in one country and, in a sense, the environmental costs being borne in another?
All right. Thank you very much for answering my questions. That's it for me for framing sustainability marketing. And I hope that viewers back home, you have understood everything regarding this chapter. And until we meet again, it's bye for now.